Hello, folks. I'm Lloyd Coleman, and I'm the Classical Council Chair at the Ivors Academy. And we are having a very special conversation today for Ivors Classical Week with Lynne. Hello, Lynne. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, Lloyd. I'm Lynne Plowman. I'm a member of the Ivors Academy. I'm on the Senate. I'm one of the senators, and I'm also a member of the Classical Council and also the Wales Council.
Amazing. Well, thanks for taking time to chat with me, Lynne. And we've been asked to talk about some of the challenges that are out there for composers at the moment as we see it, and a little bit about the work that we're involved with at the Ivors Academy to address some of those challenges or to highlight them. So it's a good place for us to start there, if that's not too negative, is for us to talk about, what do you think, Lynne, is kind of the most, what are those challenges for contemporary classical composers in the UK at the moment?
Um, and it's always been challenging for composers, I
Mm.
think. But I think things are particularly difficult at the moment just because of the current economic situation. We're quite a vulnerable part of a very big arts ecology, I think, and we rely,
Mm.
certainly classical composers specifically, rely entirely really on commission fees for income from organisations, whether that's festivals or orchestras or choirs or um, chamber ensembles, individual musicians, and all of those things. All of those organisations are struggling financially at the moment, so that obviously impacts on us. And I think that's one of the reasons I love being part of the Ivors Academy, is that it is a community of composers and we ourselves together form an organisation. Whereas normally in our line of work, we are working very much as individuals and as solo kind of artists, and that can be quite isolating and can make you quite vulnerable. So yes, I think that's one of the challenges, and also education, music and education is something that we're um, struggling with, especially since COVID. I think just getting instruments back into the hands of kids and introducing them to music and new music in particular. Yeah, there's work to
Yeah,
do.
totally agree, Lynn. And I mean, taking those two things in turn, the pressures do feed down. I think I agree with you completely. Do absolutely feed down to composers. Just in the last 12 months alone, obviously, we're looking at things like the pressures that arts organisations and orchestras and choirs and opera houses have faced from the pressures that are on our public funding bodies. We've had potential cuts being talked about with the BBC singers and various BBC orchestras. And I think we've done a lot of work, certainly on the Classical Council, to engage with the BBC in particular, and to talk about why it is so important that these things are preserved and protected as far as possible. To lose the BBC singers would be a disaster, no doubt about it. And I mean, they are such a huge commissioner of new music. I mean, Lynn, have you written for the BBC singers? I can't remember
I
if you
have.
worked
I
with them
haven't been
directly.
commissioned by the BBC Singers, but they have sung and recorded one of my works, and I think they're an incredibly special organisation in terms of composers aspiring to write music that maybe is quite untouchable by some choirs. There's there's a real need for singers like that who work together to sing new music. It's quite a specific set of skills that they have.
And once you lose that, you don't get it back, right? Or it's very difficult to build that back up to the same level.
Exactly, exactly. It's very specialist. And in that group, I think there are singers that have been working together and singing together for a long time. So that it's the same
Mm.
with orchestras, isn't it? That you create a community of musicians that are used to playing together, and it's that those relationships when you're actually playing and singing together are very specific and take a long time to build up. It's not like having a group of freelancers. So it's
Sure.
yeah, it is a special thing. We don't want to lose that.
Yeah, it was incredibly alarming when that was first kind of mooted back in April time, I think it was earlier this year. And at the same time as it being really alarming and distressing that we would potentially lose this incredibly valuable part of the BBC classical music output, it was actually very heartening in a way to see the composing community come together with such a strong voice to support the BBC singers and to support the orchestras. Um, I wrote a letter on behalf of the Ivors Academy Classical Community of Composers, which was signed by something north of 700 composers. And I know many other choirs and institutions did similar letters and petitions. And actually, that noise and that outcry actually did make a difference. It did halt that decision being made. And all the signs right now are that the BBC singers and the future of the orchestras are in a much more positive place than they were 6 or so months ago. Work is not done, and the conversations are still happening. But it was so nice in a way to feel that actually we could have that influence together when we come together as a community in this way.
Absolutely, and it did feel like we were listened to. And yes, hopefully there's more positive news in the future.
Yeah, fingers crossed. And on your second point around education, I know you're doing a lot of work in this area yourself at the moment, and it's an area I'm really passionate about too, about new voices in music and young people getting engaged with orchestral music and classical music. I benefited from free school music lessons when I was a kid at my local state school in South Wales, and obviously very sadly, we've moved a long way from that in many areas, and provision is very patchy. I wonder if what thoughts you have kind of in that area, and what you're seeing as a composer in that space at the moment.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. So I'm involved in a scheme down in West Wales, where I am at the moment, and I go into approximately 16, 17 secondary schools all across southwest Wales, up to Aberystwyth, down to Carmarthen, that area. And it's mixed. You know, there are some schools that are doing fantastically well and have just chosen as schools to invest in their students' musical education. So, you know, there are still some schools where certain children can receive free music lessons, but I know that that's not the norm. And what was really interesting, we did a presentation in Carmarthen recently to schools from the whole of that county. These are sort of 14 to 18-year-olds. And I was working with some musicians from the BBC National Orchestra of Wales. And there were about 100 students in the room. And one of the musicians asked, how many of you play a string instrument? And maybe 3 or 4 hands went up in this room of 100 children that were taking GCSE or A-level music. So they'd already opted to take music. But I think those orchestral instruments are less favoured than they used to be, especially strings. I think we've got a strong playing community. Singing is really strong, some fantastic choirs, some fantastic school choirs in this area. But it's patchy, and it's not the same in every school. So I think certainly for me, when I was growing up, I was at school during the 80s, and the vast majority of my music education came through my county music service, where I did have private lessons as a flute student. I was a flautist, but everything that I did outside of school, I was in county youth band, I was in county youth orchestra. I had composition lessons at the weekends that was supplied by the local education authority. None of that was paid for. That was all free. And I'm absolutely 100% sure without access to that, I would never be working now as a professional musician. That wouldn't have happened. My worry is that we go back to a place where only the privileged students are able to pursue that interest. And I mean, what I think is a really positive thing about young composers now, I also teach composition at the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama, and we see students coming through who've come from a really wide range of backgrounds, socio-economic backgrounds, and that's really healthy. And what you get then is you get a much more diverse range of voices. And I think actually that's something that's changed for the better, but I'm worried that we won't have as many people to play the music that we write unless we really support music education and the playing of instruments in school.
Yeah, it doesn't exist only on a sheet of paper. I mean, well, you can get quite philosophical about it and say it does exist, but it doesn't really exist until it's played by real living musicians who have spent many years developing their craft. And I totally agree with your point. Um, it is a worry, and it has been a worry for a long time, I think, in the field of classical music and contemporary classical music, that it is seen as the preserve of people who went to private school or independent schools or music schools. I went to myself to a music school, specialist music school, on a funded place by the DCMS. A dance and music scheme, for which I'll always be grateful. It changed my life, being able to go to a music school like that and to benefit from that kind of education. But before that, as I said, I went to a state comprehensive school and benefited from a really similar range of activities that you're talking about. Friday night youth orchestra, four counties youth orchestra during the holidays, and then graduating up through that kind of that pyramid that is really important to see, oh, I can go to the next level now, and then the next level, and then I can pursue my interest in composition and sort of find these avenues to take that further. Um, and the Ivors Academy commissioned a survey for last year's Ivors Week, actually, talking to composers about the background from which they came, and actually a surprisingly high number, I would say, I can't remember the exact figure, but a surprisingly high number of previous Ivors Classical Award winners were from state-funded schools. And it's so important that we do everything we can to protect that and to keep that kind of that range of voices. I suppose that also, in terms of another challenge that I would add to the two that we've already talked about in funding and in education, is making sure that we have a really diverse range of voices as well. Obviously, in my work, as I identify as a disabled composer, and I work with the power orchestra, and that topic and that theme of disability is something that runs through a lot of my work. And I really salute and champion, and I think it's really important that we continue to get a range of voices, not only in terms of background or ethnicity or disability or sexuality or gender, but actually a range of compositional voices as well, to make sure that actually we're celebrating kind of a really eclectic diversity of voices in our industry, which brings us on nicely, I suppose, to talking about the Ivors Classical Awards and what that means for our sector and for our community. How important do you see it as being the Ivors Classical Awards, which sits at the heart of Ivors Week?
I think it's a wonderful celebration, really. And I never really think of it so much as a competition, as a celebration of just all of us kind of celebrating our work and our community, and being able to kind of have a bit of a party and go, look, we've survived another year and we've written this and all this music. And I think you're absolutely right that the diverse musical languages now, that's a much healthier kind of community than it used to be, where there were certain factions in contemporary music where you felt you had to kind of be part of one of those, and if what you were doing wasn't part of that, I think that's all gone now. And I think that's so much more exciting that we're kind of have some really nice conversations at that event, at the Ivors, in the Ivors Week, and the classical, just about about the nuts and bolts of music. That maybe there are some very geeky conversations that I just love. There are some things that you can only talk as a composer to another composer about, that they kind of get really excited about and really understand, and the fact that there are so many different languages, and there's so much respect, I think, between composers who are working in different musical languages for each other's work. That's a much better place to be.
And is it a bigger venue this year? Is it the BFI on the South Bank? So we'll have much more space for which in which the award can happen. But as you say, that networking opportunity is so important, and I think that's something that the Ivors Academy does really, really well. I mean, me and you, we sit on various councils and committees and do our work as senators, kind of bringing our voices to any discussion that the Ivors might be having. But actually, there are so many networking opportunities as well for composers to get involved with, whether it's online or whether it's in person. I know the Ivors really want to be doing more outside of London as well, giving more opportunities for people in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland and the north of England to get involved in the conversation, for it not only happening in London, where most of the kind of activity has been traditionally seen to be happening. So I think there's so much kind of to look forward to with the Ivors. And someone told me earlier that it's 80 years next year since the Ivors were born in a previous guild. I wrote it down as the Composers Guild of Great Britain, founded by or co-founded by one Vaughan Williams. And it seems really fitting and really wonderful that actually the Ivors is still here, it's still going strong and still playing a really, really important in kind of our national musical conversation.
Absolutely, and amplifying the voices of composers that we're not always the noisiest bunch, are we? I think naturally a lot of composers are inclined, actually, if they've got some spare time, they want to spend it by themselves with their manuscript paper, getting some music written. So I think, yeah, it is a really important organisation.
Well, if you're interested in getting involved and you're watching this, please get in touch. Please take a look at the website. Please consider standing to be a senator next time there are elections, because I've certainly found it to be a really rewarding experience, and I've learned a lot through doing it as well. Learned a lot not only from classical colleagues such as yourself, Lynne, but also colleagues in jazz and in songwriting and in media, you know, seeing how they operate and how sometimes they have similar challenges and sometimes each of us have very specific challenges. And I know going forward, you know, the classical committee and the classical community within the Ivors will continue to put on pressure where it needed to be put on people, or ask questions when questions need to be asked, support each other when we can, to keep kind of asking questions of the wider sector, to be conducting surveys, to be continuing with our composers and the pressure campaign. There's so much activity happening, whether behind the scenes or publicly. It's a really exciting time, I think, to be part of the conversation at the Ivors. Wouldn't you agree?
Definitely. I mean, for me, it's been fantastic, especially as someone who lives and works in Wales. I certainly feel much more connected now to things that are happening nationally and things that are happening in London. A lot of our meetings take place online, so I would really encourage anyone who wants to get more involved in the organisation to get in touch.
Amazing. Well, Lynne, thank you for your time today. Are you going to the Ivors? I hope you are.
I'm hoping I will. It's whether I can get to London that week from Wales, but fingers crossed. I was there last year. I had a fantastic time there last year.
Great. Well, if you're not there, I'll have a drink for you.
Yes,
I'll
please.
raise a glass.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time, Lynne, and see you soon.
See you soon, Lloyd. Thank you.